So Jason Segel just casually dropped one of the most chaotic admissions in sitcom history. The man who played Marshall Erickson for 9 seasons on How I Met Your Mother, one of the most beloved characters in the entire show, has come out and said he never watched the finale. Not a little bit. Not halfway through, never. He has not seen how his own story ends. And the internet, rightfully, is losing its mind over this. But before we get into all of that, let's back up. Because if you haven't watched How I Met Your Mother, or if you watched it but somehow missed the nuclear fallout that followed the finale, you need to understand the full picture. This was not just any finale. This was one of the most divisive endings in television history. We are talking about a show that ran for 9 years, from 2005 to 2014, built an enormous and deeply passionate fan base, and then in its final 22 minutes, managed to undo almost everything it had spent nearly a decade constructing. And now, the guy who is at the center of it all is telling us he never even watched it happen. Let me set the stage. How I Met Your Mother debuted on CBS on September 19, 2005, according to CBS press records. It was a show about a group of friends in New York City, built around this central mystery of how Ted Mosby eventually meets the woman he will marry and have children with. Ted narrates the whole thing to his future kids from the year 2030. That is the hook. That is the engine of the whole show. And for 9 years, millions of people tuned in every week to follow Ted, Marshall, Lily, Barney, and Robin through their relationships, their careers, their heartbreaks, and their triumphs. The show ran for 208 episodes across 9 seasons, making it one of the longest-running sitcoms in CBS history. It was produced by Bays and Thomas Productions in association with 20th Television, and its syndication deal was reportedly worth over $400 million, according to Deadline Hollywood's 2012 coverage of the sale. At its peak, How I Met Your Mother was pulling in over 12 million viewers per episode, according to Nielsen ratings data from the 2012 to 2013 season. It won multiple Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series for Kristen Milioti, who played the mother, in 2014. The show also won the People's Choice Award for Favorite Network TV Comedy 4 consecutive times between 2010 and 2013, which tells you something about how deeply the general public, not just critics, had invested in these characters. People loved this show. They were invested. These characters felt like real people that audiences had grown up alongside. And then the finale aired on March 31st, 2014, and everything fell apart. Without going too deep into spoilers for anyone who somehow hasn't heard about this yet, the finale basically revealed that the mother had died years before Ted was even telling this story to his kids. And then, in the final minutes, Ted ends up pursuing Robin, the woman he had been on and off with for the entire show, and who the series had spent considerable time establishing was not right for him. The kids in the finale essentially give Ted their blessing to go after Robin. The blue French horn comes back out. Roll credits. What made this particularly devastating to fans was that the entire 9th season had been structured around Barney and Robin's wedding weekend, a 48-hour period that the show stretched across 24 episodes. The audience had just spent a full season being sold on Barney and Robin as a couple, only to watch their marriage wildly dissolve in the first 10 minutes of the finale. The reaction was something to behold. A petition on change.org calling for CBS to produce an alternate ending gathered over 130,000 signatures, according to reporting by Entertainment Weekly in April 2014. Reddit threads dedicated to HIMYM were running thousands of comments, deep with fans expressing genuine grief and anger. TV critics who had championed the show for years were writing think pieces about betrayal and narrative dishonesty. The show's co-creators, Carter Bays and Craig Thomas, had to do a full media circuit defending their choices. The finale drew 12.9 million viewers, according to Nielsen, making it one of the most watched episodes of the entire series, which means millions of people watched it, hated it, and then spent the next decade talking about how much they hated it. That is a specific kind of cultural wound. Now here's the wild part. The ending had actually been planned since 2006, Bays and Thomas had filmed the scene of the kids giving Ted their blessing back in season 2, with the original child actors, specifically because they knew those kids would age out of the roles before the show ended. So the entire finale was essentially locked in almost from the beginning. 9 years of storytelling, and the ending was already baked into a tape sitting in a vault somewhere. Which brings us back to Jason Segel, because if you know anything about the behind-the-scenes history of HIMYM, Jason Segel's relationship with the show in its later years was complicated, to put it diplomatically. By season 8, it was widely reported that Segel was struggling with the commitment the show required. He had become a major film star, with Forgetting Sarah Marshall in 2008, The Muppets in 2011, which he wrote and starred in, and which won the Academy Award for Best Original Song according to the Academy's records, and a string of other projects. He was a movie guy who also happened to be doing a network sitcom, and those two worlds were pulling him in different directions. In a 2022 interview with GQ magazine, Segel spoke candidly about how creatively unfulfilled he was toward the end of HIMYM's run. He said the last few years of the show were genuinely difficult for him, that he felt the character of Marshall had run his natural course, and there wasn't much left to discover about him. He talked about showing up on set and not feeling connected to the material in the way he had been in the earlier seasons. That is a hard thing for an actor to admit about a show that made him a household name. And his exit from the show, while technically a full cast send-off in the finale, had been the subject of years of speculation. After season 8, there were serious questions about whether Segel would even return for the 9th and final season. He eventually did, but on a limited basis. Marshall spent a significant portion of season 9 separated from the rest of the group due to a storyline involving a judgeship in New York, which many fans and critics noted felt like a convenient narrative solution for a scheduling problem. The Hollywood Reporter ran pieces in 2013 about the difficulty of coordinating Segel's availability with the rest of the show's production schedule. So when Segel says he never watched the finale, it lands differently knowing all of that context. This wasn't a busy guy who just forgot to tune in. This was someone who had already emotionally checked out of the show before it was even over. The finale was the final chapter of a story he had already mentally closed. And look, he's not alone in having complicated feelings about the ending. Kobe Smulders, who played Robin, has spoken in interviews about the difficulty of reconciling the character she had built over 9 years with how the finale chose to use her. Allison Hannigan, who played Lily, has said in roundtable discussions that she cried for different reasons than joy when they filmed the finale. Josh Radnor, who played Ted, has been asked about the ending in virtually every interview he's done since 2014 and has consistently had to defend choices that weren't entirely his to defend. Neil Patrick Harris, who played Barney, has been perhaps the most publicly conflicted. In a 2014 interview with Howard Stern, Harris said that he personally did not agree with the decision to dissolve Barney and Robin's marriage so quickly in the finale, calling it a gut punch to a character arc he had spent years carefully building. But Jason Segel just never watched it. That is a different level of detachment entirely, because watching the finale, even if you hate it, is a form of closure. It's an acknowledgement that something ended. Not watching it is a choice to keep a door open in your head, or maybe to keep a door permanently closed. Either way, it tells you something about how he felt. And here's what really makes this interesting. Jason Segel is not a disengaged, checked-out kind of person professionally. This is a man who co-wrote The Muppets because he genuinely loves The Muppets. Like, he didn't just show up and perform, he spent years developing that project out of pure creative love. He wrote Forgetting Sarah Marshall while going through a real breakup, pouring genuine emotion into that screenplay. He wrote the screenplay for Jeff Who Lives at Home. He has a clear artistic conscience and cares deeply about the work he puts his name on, which means his refusal to watch the HIMYM finale isn't indifference. It's actually the opposite. It's someone who cared enough about Marshall Erickson, about what that character meant, that he couldn't bring himself to watch an ending he didn't believe in. That is actually kind of beautiful when you think about it, in a weird, sad, backwards way. Because Marshall was genuinely one of the great sitcom characters of his era. The big-hearted lawyer from Minnesota who loved his wife more than anything else in the world, who believed in monsters and kept score of every argument he'd ever won, who cried at literally everything and wasn't ashamed of it. Marshall was the emotional core of that show in a way that often didn't get enough credit because Ted's romantic quest was the engine and Barney's antics got the biggest laughs. But Marshall and Lily were the heart. They were the proof that love actually works out, that you can find your person young and build a life with them, and it can be enough. Their ending in the finale was actually one of the better received parts of the episode. Marshall and Lily, for once, got a relatively clean and satisfying conclusion, and yet the man who played Marshall still couldn't watch it. That tells you everything you need to know about how the finale landed, even for the people who were in it. When your own cast members are opting out of watching the ending, you have a problem that goes beyond Twitter complaints and change.org petitions. You have a fundamental disconnect between the story the audience fell in love with and the story the creators decided to tell. Carter Bays has addressed this in recent years with a degree of honest reflection that is worth acknowledging. In a 2020 interview with Entertainment Weekly, he admitted that the finale would have been handled differently if they hadn't locked themselves into that filmed footage from 2006. He acknowledged that the show's understanding of Robin and Ted's relationship had evolved significantly over 9 seasons, and that the ending didn't fully honor that evolution. That's a big admission from a showrunner. That is basically saying, yes, we know it didn't land the way it should have. Craig Thomas, in the same interview cycle, went slightly further, suggesting that if the show were made today with the benefit of streaming flexibility and no locked footage, the mother's death would have been handled across a full additional season rather than compressed into a single episode. He acknowledged that Tracy McConnell, the mother, deserved more screen time than the show ultimately gave her. The alternate ending, which was included on the DVD release of the final season, gives Ted a different conclusion, one that focuses entirely on the mother and his relationship with her, without the Robin epilogue. Fans who have watched both versions almost universally prefer the alternate ending. It's not even close. And the fact that it exists, that Bays and Thomas had the foresight, or maybe the guilt, to produce it, says something about their own awareness of what the official ending was going to do to the audience. So here we are, more than a decade after the finale aired, and Jason Segel is still out here having never pressed play. In one sense, it's hilarious. In another sense, it is the most honest review the High Mim finale has ever received. No critic's take, no Reddit essay, no YouTube video essay has said more about the failure of that ending than the simple fact that one of the show's lead actors looked at it, shrugged, and decided his time was better spent elsewhere. Marshall Erickson would have watched it, though. He would have watched it, cried at the sad parts, made a sandwich, and then called his mom to talk about his feelings. That's just who Marshall was, and maybe that's exactly why Jason Segel couldn't.